Don't you love short seasons with a cliffhanger ending that tells a third of the story? And with production timelines, we probably won't get a season 3 until 2027. By the way, they haven't started writing it yet. Not to mention that Craig Mazin has stated that he also has intentions of making a season 4 from the second game. To clarify for this video, this review will operate as an overall season review that also touches on the big events in the final episode. So to start, this season is confusing in how they're deciding to lay out the story. Like, is the third season going to just be Abby's story? Because if they follow the same format from this season where each Seattle day is an episode long, then that season would be 3 episodes. Which begs the question, why not finish out her perspective with 3 episodes and make season 2 10 episodes long? I know you can add more to the story and potentially stretch it out to like 6 episodes, but they didn't do that for Ellie. They literally did the opposite where they cut out material from her days. Some examples include the group that killed Joel doesn't have as many characters, meaning that Ellie killing one of them in her first day in the game is entirely removed. This has the inadvertent side effect of her first main kill being at the end of the second day, so her commencing on this violent path is stalled. Them following after Tommy's trail of destruction is non-existent, there are some set pieces with Jesse that are entirely cut, and there's a lack of general survival action scenes. Like, maybe she has to overcome a few wolves to get a boat so she can go to the aquarium, instead of arriving at the exact moment they're heading to Scar Island. Even her getting into the hospital is extremely convenient, and she doesn't have to kill anyone. It's kind of crazy that she only kills 4 people on this devastating journey, which is a very big contrast to the game. All of this is to point out that Ellie's Seattle days are cut down and are poorly paced. She's teleporting around the city because in the game, all of that time includes fighting her way through a war zone. I know you can't just have straight action with no story, but when you're cutting most of that out and not replacing it with anything, it leads to rushed pacing concerns. You're downplaying the character struggle of moving through the city and making it seem too easy for these characters to pursue vengeance in a battlefield setting. You can't place a narrative focal point on that and then simultaneously have characters teleport around or effortlessly achieve what they want. I feel this would be best corrected if each day of Seattle was longer than an episode. The finale I think is mostly fine being a singular episode, but forcing these days into a one-size-fits-all 50-episode format doesn't work and is actively detrimental for the first 2 days. A big part of the first season was that Craig Mazin added a lot to the story. Even Jackson this season is greatly fleshed out, and the same can't be said for the Seattle portion, which should be the main aspect of this season. This creates this unbalanced structural change where we spend more time in Jackson than Seattle. Also, in terms of what they choose to show given that we don't have a lot of screen time in Seattle, having more of a focus on Dina and Ellie bonding and them falling in love entirely pivots the tone and story focal point in the opposite direction. Those moments work so effectively in the game because they were microscopic blissful moments in a sea of misery, while in the show, they're replacing that emphasis of revenge for love. If you were telling this day in a 2-episode time frame, then having Ellie sing to Dina would be better because we wouldn't be losing out on her falling down that abyss of vengeance. This should be a suffocating and bleak journey that's devoid of happiness, and it's quite literally the opposite until the very ending. As an example for why the story doesn't feel as compelling in the last episode, comes from Ellie's final major choice of either going to save Tommy or pursuing Abby. Her choice here should illustrate that she's fully consumed by revenge given that she's neglecting to save someone she loves that's in mortal danger. For this version of Ellie,
natural gas, baby,
I have a hard time believing she'd choose to go after Abby, given that an episode prior, she was willing to drop this entire campaign because Dina was pregnant.
Do you want to go back? I'll take you back. You don't need to do this with me.
To which, Dina had to convince her to stay. This is why I labeled this moment as a narrative breaking point because it downplays the whole point of vengeance, along with the notion of it having a cost. Dina being pregnant and her becoming a burden to Ellie acts to push Ellie down this dark path. She's neglecting love for hate. This damage to the story's core DNA has rippling consequences, and even though this final episode is on the more faithful side, it doesn't feel like these final moments of the story are earned, or at the very least, are drastically outclassed surpassed by the game's events of the story, where they're more impactful. Along with Ellie's character being botched from the game, and their insistence of her being dumb drives me crazy.
And is that all guns, or do you have medical supplies in there? No?
The moment of her wanting to rush 7 wolves to save a Seraphite child is maddening, and I think it's a massive misread for her character that she's so reckless to the point that she becomes a blind brute with no thought. There's a lot more wrong with her character, but this is such a deep topic that I think I need to make a separate video for that to do it justice. While on the subject of poor changes from the source material for this episode, Ellie's whole excursion to Scar Island was laughably bad. There's a lot to unpack here, so firstly, the island is pretty far away, maybe a mile at most, so the fact that Ellie somehow washes up ashore when she was heading in the opposite direction is wild. That just shouldn't happen at all, and Ellie would be dead right now from drowning. Then when she does wash ashore, she's taken captive and the process of her being cleansed commences. This conveniently gets interrupted right before she dies, and if they believe she's a wolf or at the very least an enemy outsider, then why are they leaving her unattended?
Go on then, cut his throat.
To me, it makes no sense how Ellie can survive this encounter, let alone even getting here in the first place, and if you're going to compromise the narrative and display Ellie as having plot armor, then it better be for a good reason. However, this is all done to show that the wolves are attacking the Scar Island, even though that was implied in the scene prior, or you could even have a throwaway line coming from Isaac that they mean to attack their home. This completely distracts from Ellie's narrative, and the writers also rationalize this as a point of showcasing how gone Ellie is on this path of vengeance, given that she had a close-to-death encounter and still chooses to go after Abby. But that happens all the time, and she just chose to not save Tommy, which illustrates the point of her being too far gone. So this seems like a weird justification for this being one of the main reasons for this scene existing. Not to mention paying the price of your character avoiding death on 2 separate occasions. So yeah, I think it was a good call cutting the scene from the game, and just because it was considered being included there, doesn't mean it should be in the show. From here we have Ellie confronting Owen and Mel, and this was done pretty good justice. Mel asking Ellie to perform a C-section was pretty metal, and at first I was conflicted on this moment, but I feel it operates as a way to further accentuate the loss of the unborn child, and Ellie breaking down over killing them and not being able to save the baby. Really pushes Ellie over the edge and gets her to a point of wanting to abandon this quest. Them dying also being a collateral kill has some strong thematic resonance surrounding vengeance in general. This cycle of violence has so many unforeseen casualties, and this being one of them is great. It's better than having Mel attack Ellie after she shoots Owen, because it justifies Ellie more in self-defense. The blame is still mostly on Ellie, but I don't think the guilt derived from that moment is as strong as it being an accident. Which this is going into an overall positive point for the season in that there are genuinely some good changes here and there, but since there are big foundational changes that are made for the worse, it's hard to focus on the show's positives. Most of the stuff in Jackson is really good and gives that aspect of the story more depth. I love the Eugene revelation and how they approached Ellie figuring out about Joel lying via a different and more nuanced way. The whole flashback episode even gives Joel more characterization, and Dina has really stood out this season when she was originally a character I didn't care about. There are some very faithful big plot points from the game, but I don't think they're as effective here given how they're built up to. The ending as well is basically a shot-for-shot remake, and would be an excellent ending if it wasn't for the fumbling of the story mid-season. Everything here though was very well done. Love Caitlin Dever's line delivery.
I let you live, and you wasted it.
And this is so good to the point that I honestly care more for Abby's character now. Ellie throughout this season was done such an injustice to where I'm ironically more excited to see Abby's side of the story. When in the game, it's the opposite. You actively bemoan having to switch to Abby, and it's a miraculous process how Neil Druckmann endears you to her character given the immense prejudice everyone has towards her. It's genuinely an achievement in storytelling. I'm still confused how they intend to tell it out in the show, because if season 4 will most likely pick up after the Seattle portion, then the only way to execute a full season is to do 2 episodes a day, which highlights a contrast to the first season in that they didn't do the same for Ellie, the main character of the story. On a technicality though, there's more that goes on for Abby, so that should at least better lend to more episodes. Tackling one issue with season 2 that I haven't really brought up in my episodic reviews is that the dialogue this season, and especially in this final episode, is too blunt and on the nose. Jesse at 2 points directly tells Ellie that he better not die here because of her actions.
I'm gonna be a father, which means I can't die. I am not dying out here.
You don't have to have a character directly say this, and you can have Jesse be more passive-aggressive or not clearly lay out to the audience, hey, I'm about to be a walking consequence of Ellie's whole pursuit of Abby. Another point here for the dialogue is that characters will regularly blurt out how they're feeling.
So the springs hold the levers?
The thing is, I try. I know I'm a hard ass and maybe overprotective, and she's her.
Or there generally needs to be a more offhanded approach to the dialogue. Actors can communicate this information expertly, and having lines that expressly state the obvious fundamentally lacks nuance and subtext. Or sometimes the approach of less is more is generally more natural for dialogue in terms of how characters express what they feel. If you want to see any examples, then watch some cutscenes from the game, because I think Neil Druckmann is a bit better when it comes to writing dialogue. For this review, I've been featuring the negatives, and there are some glowing positives. The acting is flooring, and even someone who regularly gets bashed, being Bella Ramsey, I think she gives an excellent performance. She's just unfortunately being let down by the writing. It's not her choice that she's being written more as a child instead of a fully mature adult at this point. Multiple side characters are elevated, especially Dina, but even Jesse is made to be more endearing and likable. I think the show gives him a stronger and more important role in the community. It feels like his value is far greater, so when his inevitable loss comes, it hits you much harder. Giving us more backstory for him as well is great. Like him meeting that traitor and almost leaving showcased some interesting characterization and highlighted his loyalty. It's just too bad that the scene was sandwiched with Jesse looking into the camera and saying he didn't want to die. In the game, when he did bite the dust, and given that he didn't have much development, I honestly didn't care that much, or not as much as the writers intended. So it's nice that Jesse was done more justice, and I do also kind of hate that Jesse was used as a deus ex machina, and then holds over Ellie's head that he saved her, when it's like, no, in any realistic scenario that shouldn't have happened. Moving on, the production value of the show is mind-boggling. So many crazy sets, which by the way, some of them are only featured for like a few minutes, which really illustrates how high value this production is. The VFX is also indistinguishable from reality at times. There's some iconic moments of action, and the season to me was close to being great if it wasn't for the multiple baffling changes made from the source material. It leads to such a conflicting viewing experience where some scenes viewed on their own are great, but when I take a step back and see what it does for the wider narrative, it's actually for the worse. The biggest changes made are so detrimental to the point that it overshadows all the micro good changes that were made throughout the season. I'm sure for people who haven't played the game won't have as negative of a reaction to this season. However, I genuinely just urge people to go play the game during the wait, because it's both executed much better and you wouldn't have to wait 4 years for them to finish out this story, assuming it takes them 2 years a season as it normally does. Like, will people even care anymore by the time the ending rolls around? Joel died back in 2025, so I feel there will be a fundamental emotional disconnection viewers will have with being in the character's headspace in 2029 for the story's ending. This is the unforeseen consequence of separating the second game into 3 seasons. This expectation of studios thinking the audience will wait unreasonably long times for seasons that end on cliffhangers and already have short episode counts will lead to nothing but disappointment. It's one thing having a short season, but it's another in which you're telling half of the story, let alone a third of it. I know going into this season this was going to be the outcome. However, telling someone they're about to be kicked in the balls doesn't relieve the sensation of when they do it. This rant may give off the impression of audience entitlement in that we need to be more patient because it takes a while to make these shows. But I feel you have to be pragmatic with how long you're taking to tell the story, and does it lose its effectiveness from audience interest dropping off over time? Seasons 3 and 4 should definitely be combined, unless if they have a massive amount of story they're wishing to add for the last third of the game. Thanks for watching, and I want to do a deeper dive on Ellie's character, and I'll try to get that out in the coming week. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this season, and my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. Thanks to my outstanding top patron, Logan Farmer.